I mean, I would say my earliest memory of Spider-Man, and Kemp and Justin have heard this a million times at this point.
It's still a great story.
But yeah, I was born in Portugal, and our family crest is actually the spider. So my middle name is Aranha, which means spider in Portuguese.
That's great.
So my first visual memory of anything was John Romita Sr. image of Spider-Man in my room growing up. So every holiday, every birthday, it was always a spider-related gift coming from Portugal, and it felt like it was almost, I don't know, destined or unavoidable. Like I was on a collision course to do something spider-related.
Someone put it in your room.
Literally.
And you're like, well,
this is it.
this is it.
This is it.
Well, I remember my first start of Spider-Man was, as a kid, I was obsessed with underoos. Like I love, for some reason.
Yeah.
They're fun to wear.
And also my mom always likes to tell me, I didn't know which hero I wanted to be that day. So she said I would wear up to 8 underoos t-shirts at once. So I could, I could change.
Layers.
And I wanted, and Spider-Man was obviously one of them, but I was obsessed with action figures growing up. Like really, even before I could read comics and stuff. And I remember the way she would kind of convince me to go shopping with her was she would give me my Spider-Man action figure, and I would grip it so tight that the black web spider on the back would actually wear off. And I remember to this day still remember my best friend as a kid had the newer Spider-Man action figure, and I would just be so upset that he had the cooler looking one than I did. And it's like from that day on, it was just like Spider-Man.
That's awesome. Was it the Secret Wars Spider-Man?
He had the Secret Wars Spider-Man. There you go. Yeah, he had it. Yes.
We were talking about earlier. We were talking about the first things we saw. Like what was it? Was it a comic? Was it a poster? Yeah. And we were mentioning the reruns of the 1960s Spider-Man cartoon, and they ran during the afternoon, and I just remember seeing the opening credits with the greatest theme song of all time. And the lyrics tell his whole story. And there's that moment when he swings by and he waves. He waves to the camera. But in my mind, it's like, he's waving to me.
That's awesome.
And from that, something clicked, and I said, he's my guy. And my parents went with it. And when I was in 4th grade, my mom, it was my birthday, she brings to school a sheet cake. John Romita, Spider-Man. And that for one day I was a cool kid in class. But that's it, it's those early seeds, and you just, boom, you pick it. And then my family was cool with it.
Yeah, I grew up in Brooklyn, so I think Spider-Man stood out. I don't have a single comic, but he stood out because he was one of the first superheroes who was in a city I recognized. Because all the DC comics I was looking at, they were in Metropolis, they were in Gotham. Even the X-Men were like upstate, which I didn't go upstate New York till I was like 20 years old. I really was like a townie in Brooklyn. So, my view of the city was usually in a Spider-Man comic. But I remember, there was no one comic. One of the things that made Spider-Man always jump out at me was he always seemed to be beating up or beating people who were more powerful than him. Spider-Man would beat the Juggernaut. Spider-Man would fight all of the X-Men in Secret Wars. Spider-Man would beat like the wheels off of Iron Man. He would always figure out a way. He was kind of like there's like those God level heroes like Thor and the Hulk and Juggernaut. And for some reason, Spider-Man would always kind of tap into something that even though he wasn't this godlike hero, he always managed to beat people who were bigger than him or stronger than him. And that really, I think, kind of tapped into this underdog quality that made him super duper appealing to me.
And he'd come back home bruised and beaten and have to...
And still have to go to class.
That's right.
Yes.
So his own suit back up. Yeah.
For me, it was the 1967 cartoon series, which was still running in the 70s. And then in 77, there was a live action Spider-Man. So if you're watching, Battlestar Galactica or Chips or whatever was on. So that was there. That wasn't as good, but my young self was still very excited. And then I think the Corgi helicopter that has the web rotor, my mom bought me that at Solvang. Wow. And that was the first really exciting Spider-Man thing I had in my life.
I always avoid this question because I also remember the animations in the morning we would watch those reruns, and I only remembered the theme song. And I love singing it, but I was more of an X-Men person.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Plenty of crossover there with Spider-Man.
Many crossovers.
Well, I guess if I had to go to my earliest memory, I don't know where, I will never be able to remember exactly where I saw it. It might have been because I grew up on Hollywood Boulevard looking out over the Chinese Theater from my window. It might have been just like the people in costume.
Just dressed.
hanging out on next to the Man Chinese Theater that I used to walk past every other day with my parents. But somehow I became obsessed with, I think, the iconography. I've always just been so fascinated with visual design and art was my first language. And so like I think English was like a distant third. So as you can tell, and I think my earliest memory of Spider-Man is actually being in kindergarten, and they were insisting that I learn the alphabet, like I said, distant third. And they were insisting that I learn the alphabet. And I said, I do not have time. This is finger painting time. And I am really busy making my painting of Spider-Man right now. Wow. And I refused to stop. And all the other kids had sat down, and I started having like a tantrum in the school in kindergarten, because I was like, I'm not done with the foot. I'm still trying to draw the foot, and I need to get it right before I'm done. And I remember they had to like pull me away and take me to the principal's office.
Became a whole thing.
It became a whole thing. They brought my parents in, and I refused to do any work until I could do only finger painting. And they were like, well, what if we make a deal with you that once a week you can, because there used to be arts education in this country. Yeah. And sorry, politics. There used to be arts education, and we had an art teacher that the class would go see, like our kindergarten class at Los Feliz Elementary would go see once a week. Yeah. And they said, what if we give you an extra hour a week just by yourself with the art teacher? Will you learn your alphabet? And I was like, deal.
Wow.
So thankfully, someone was able to get me to learn how to speak, and now you can suffer.
And that's how Spider-Verse was made.
How to draw comics the Marvel way.
Yes.
So not only the book, which it starts out with the book, but then I got the video cassette.
Ooh,
wow.
And,
wow.
And so the video cassette.
You were fancy.
Yeah, it was fantastic. It's quite a piece of technology. So even though it's about drawing comics, and of course what we're doing today is not exactly that, you're still posing the character and displaying them as dynamically and heroically as possible, which is what they're driving home as the Marvel way. Right. And so even that section on composition, I still show it because it's fantastic, and you get their voices in your head. So there's this one section where they're showing like a panel that John Buscema has drawn. And he's done it mediocre. How the competitors would do it. He's like, you see, it tells the story. It's okay, but it lacks drama and sheer excitement. And then Buscema chimes in, these panels are too vertical. They're too straight up and down, and they lack the power of a Marvel character. I watch that so much that those things they're in my head, and so when we're in any review,
that's how he talks during the review.
Yeah.
Those voices.
Yeah, in any review, their voices are in that review.
Amazing.
But I will say, like when we're on set, when we're doing like a shoot, Bobby will get into the pose and say, "This is how I wanted to stand."
Yeah.
It's like it's really
which
cool.
is what Stan used to do. He'd get up on his desk and he'd act out a story for whether it was Kirby or Buscema or Ditko, and he would act it out, and then they would go. And I think that was so important to all of us. Whatever we saw, Marvel was very different from when they started doing merchandising. They used, or I'm sure the actual creators wanted to be involved. So when it came to posters, when it came to Spider-Man being on a Slurpee cup, it was John Romita Sr., he's the one that comes after Ditko and brings this whole soap opera slick style, and he kind of established, he literally did, and it was a thing we all look at, this page of like how to draw Spider-Man, and how to do the webs. And John Romita eventually became one of the art directors at Marvel, and he's the one that laid the groundwork so that when we saw these things as young people, they were right.
There was a unified version of them, yeah.
They were made by the people that understand and loved Spider-Man.
Right.
So as a kid, when you saw it, it looked real, it felt real.
Well, whether it was a notebook or a poster or the I had that cool dune buggy that had the net that would like sort of launch off it. Yeah.
Ego, yeah.
But like all that felt like it was coming from the same place, the same universe. You're right.
Well, the thing is, like I feel like we've all probably been asked, why is Spider-Man so popular? Like we've all got that question asked, and I think it just comes down to like, he's probably the most relatable hero you'll find, and it's like he's fighting Doc Ock or Green Goblin or Venom, but at the same time he's also worrying about his homework. Is his aunt okay? Is the girl going to like him? He has all of these, and it's like he just is. That's what makes him, like, listen, I love Thor, I love Captain America, I love Iron Man, but like there's something about Spider-Man, he has that just relatability that we can connect to, and I think that's kind of why, at least I know I was always drawn to him, because there's something that he's going on that I can say, I'm going through the same thing. How does he deal with it? And I think that's why we all gravitate toward him.
And he's funny about
it. It's more of a good time. It's not heavy or egocentric. It's it's you.
Yeah, snark didn't exist when he started. Like now, snark is ubiquitous. But at the time, his snark really stood out.
Yeah.
Especially in superhero comics where people weren't self-effacing or self-deprecating. Everybody was pretty serious.
Yeah. And the heavier it got, the snark would like sort of rise to the occasion. You'd be like, oh, he's done. He's done. He's buried under a mountain of whatever it was, and then he would make some comment.
But even that, your friends who use humor as a defense mechanism,
exactly,
right? And you're like, oh, that's how he's dealing with it. And you're like, yo, I know someone, or I get in a moment where I'm super stressed, and I make a joke of it to light it up, because if it gets too serious, I'm not going to know what to do. And just all those, he's the franchise, and whether it's Peter, whether it's Miles, they kind of have all that kind of thing in common, where it's just there's something about what they're going through, whether it's a superhero life or their normal life, that we can always find something to identify with.
We just saw a screening of Into the Spider-Verse with an orchestra backing it last night, and there was something I didn't notice that was, it's a far-off scene. It's right when Miles has been smashed by Kingpin, or when Peter's been smashed by Kingpin, and he's telling Miles, it's going to be okay, and it's clearly not going to be okay. And he gives him this like dismissive, like, oh, just go, it's fine, I'm fine. And I didn't realize it until seeing it, again for the 5th time or whatever it was on the big screen. I was like, oh man, he's still like portraying that everything's going to be totally chill and totally fine, and it raises the stakes even higher.
Yeah, it does. Well, and it's also just like that's such a great comforting thing when, I know for me, like the idea of like when I was growing up, like there was like it wasn't always great. And the idea that it was okay to like laugh at things and to find humor in situations that didn't on the surface have them,
right?
And that could carry you through things is like such a wonderful tool for coping and getting through. I mean, I had to learn not to laugh sometimes, and I think that's also what Peter Parker also had to learn sometimes. Right. You get punched harder sometimes when you laugh too much. But I think there's a great service there that it taught me. I think for me, I'll just say like it was so refreshing to me, like when we started doing it in 2015, Phil and Chris called me and wanted me to get involved in that. What was so refreshing about those comics is we had seen so many Spider-Man movies, and they're wonderful and awesome, but here was, and we'd seen a lot of superhero movies, but what was so great about it to me and was so appealing was that there was a character whose backstory wasn't rooted in tragedy. And that there was a character like, oh, there's this affirmation here that parents supporting their kids and kids who actually have a good established line of communication with their parents and who actually who love each other and have a tight bond, that can be its own strength, that its own superpower that can carry you through things. And I hadn't seen it done quite like that, because it was so rare for, we see like all the like, your dad was killed by this and your mom was killed by that and your uncle died here. And here was like, no, we love you and we'll always support you.
At the time, it was the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies coming out. And we're like, oh my gosh, where do we point people to start reading? We can't point them back to the comics from the 60s. He has a bow tie and he rides a moped. Who's going to understand that? So
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, I know. So they said, let's do the ultimate line so that we're telling it again, fresh. Fast forward 10 years, and now even the ultimate comics are complicated. So the idea was to do Miles. Here again, here's this young teenager, but as you said, let's make him different from Peter. Peter has the guilt. Every time he puts on the mask, he's doing that to make sure someone doesn't lose their Uncle Ben. So intentionally not having him with a tragedy, he comes from the point of view of, I'm a fan. This is cool. Right. And this Spider-Man has fallen. Someone needs to be Spider-Man. Oh, I got bit by a spider. I'll be Spider-Man. But he approaches it through joy.
Right.
And that helps. When he interacts with Peter, he helps him remember, like, you don't have to feel so guilty all the time.
Right.
Look at all the good things you're doing.
Yeah.
I remember the conversations of, when we, back in 2014, when we said, okay, we're gonna make a Spider-Man game. And, you mentioned like, there's so many movies, there's so many comics, there's so many, games regarding Peter. We're like, well, what are we gonna bring that's new and different, just like the comics, right? And, we're thinking of all these different ways. Well, we're not gonna do the origin story. We're gonna make him older. We're gonna make Otto his like father figure that he's like, wants to be. And we're like, what else? What is there something to say? And we just start. Where do we start? Start with the comics, and we're reading. And we're like, we just keep going back to like this Miles character's really freaking cool. Yeah. And we're like, and I remember, that's for us as developers, you're adding another character to an experience, and you're like, well, there's a big cost there. Like, we're going to build out this character. Is he going to, how is it going to work with Peter? But we just kept seeing like all the things you mentioned about what you loved about Miles and what he brings to Peter. And now, but imagine they're in the exact same world. Imagine, and then for us it was like, can we show him be a hero before he's ever even bitten by a spider? And so that and I just remember, it's probably, I make a lot of mistakes in my job. I feel like it's one of the things as a group, we were like, that was the right, even though we knew it was gonna be hard, and we're gonna have complications as we got into Spider-Man 2, now we have two heroes. Right. We were like, if we do it, it's gonna be more than worth it. And I think whether it's Peter and Miles in the Spider-Verse, you see them in our universe, it's like there's something really special when you see all of them come together. And I think for us, it's one of the things I know. It's you always think about what's gonna get me to wake up in the morning, want to do this every day, and it's like seeing them together and seeing how they, especially in Spider-Man 2, how they learn from each other, challenge each other. Yeah. And a lot of us talked about in Spider-Man 2, how can we make this story what about this story requires us having two heroes? And to see Miles from Spider-Man 1 be a hero before he gets powers, and to Miles Morales learns the kind of Spider-Man he wants to be, and by the Spider-Man 2, he's now telling Peter, hey, this is what we're gonna do. Yeah. I mean, there's one of my favorite things the writers did was in Spider-Man 1, near the end of the game, Miles asked Peter, what's the play coach? And in Spider-Man 2, near the end, Peter asked Miles, what's the play coach? And to see his evolution and see that is just to me is, I think, something that I will always be proud of, no matter what. No matter what people think about the game and all that stuff. It's one of the things that I feel like we were able to make our universe unique and to tell a story that I hope brings more people into the experience.
Yeah. It helps to have what we call North Stars. What is our North Star? And part of it was what we talked about, worlds colliding. Yep. The best Spider-Man stories are when Peter's world, his civilian life, collides with his costume life. And the other North Star that we thought was very important, again, let's do our research. Let's go back to Amazing Fantasy 15. First appearance of Spider-Man. It's all there. And at the very last panel, Stan Lee writes, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. Sometimes we shorten that. With great power comes great responsibility. We say, well, no, it doesn't always. With great power, there must, it's a choice, there must also come great responsibility. So collectively, whether we're making films, games, we always say, what is our power? Our power is we are working with these characters that we love, that are known around the world for decades. People love these characters. We get to work with them. Also, we get to work with these amazing creators. And they're going to bring their vision to this amazing character. So that is our power. And we're given this platform and the support and money to create these big things that many people could see. What is our responsibility? Don't mess it up.
Right.
Not only don't mess it up, make it great so that the current generation can be like ourselves when we were younger. And we saw something and we said, oh, they get it. They get it, the character, they know it, and they made it. Now it's our responsibility. Make something so that when it is seen, it is played, one of the emotions or thoughts that the audience may have is, I can tell this was made by fans for fans. And so that is our responsibility. Here's all the awesome stuff. Not only don't mess it up, make it great and maybe even elevate it.
Try some new things.
Thank you for coming.
It's interesting going back to Miles Morales, just to say, because I agree with all the things about the characters, but sometimes it's like the simplest things that connect with you. And one thing that I remember made Miles, because honestly, by the time Miles Morales was created, I kind of stepped away from comic books, like as a reader. As much of a fan as I was, I kind of gotten fed up with them. And I didn't know why. And there's this thing with Miles's character. Well, there's a thing that I noticed in comics and comic book characters as a kid. And it's just, I don't think it was anything done on purpose on the part of the creators, but it felt like characters of color were always the downgrade characters. They were weaker. They had shittier powers. So that if you have a group of kids sitting at a table and say, here's a superheroes, who wants to be who? Falcon's last. Black Panther's last. There's always, Luke Cage is strong, he ain't no Hulk. Right. It's always this like Whopper Jr. version of a more established white hero. Right. I'm not saying it was done on purpose. Sure. I'm saying as a kid who loved comics, no one wanted to be those characters. And Miles, I wasn't even reading comics. It's so simple. I just thought it was nice that he had dope powers. The kid could turn invisible. He could shock you with electricity. On paper, it was different, but he was as powerful as another Spider-Man. Just that. Right. Which, and by making him that, everyone wants to be him. Not just black kids. Who wouldn't want Miles's powers?
Right. Miles, and I think this, what sort of Spider-Man has evolved into is this mantle that can sort of be taken on by anybody. My kid's 8 years old. Miles is his Spider-Man. That's who he recognizes as Spider-Man first. He loves Peter, he loves Gwen, he loves them all. But Miles is his guy. And I don't know any other, I mean, maybe there is, I off the top of my head, I can't think of another superhero franchise that allows you to embody the character and sort of become, envision yourself as the character.
I actually, I love when fans are like, Miles is my favorite, Pete's my favorite, Miles is my favorite, Pete's my favorite, because that means we have done something right. That there is that is a character like, and even playing the game, I'm like, well, I want to play as Miles right now because this is the thing that I'm in the mood to play Miles, but now I'm in the mood to play Pete, and then I want to go back and you go back and forth, and like, if you can make characters where there is kind of a debate about who's the better one, then I think that's like mission accomplished.
That's what all fans do.
Exactly, right?
Exactly.
I don't want it to be like
wins, Silver Surfer, or like, I got the power.
I don't want it to be one over the other. That means we didn't make them dope. We didn't make these characters someone you aspire to be like. So like I think that's I watching Spider-Verse last night, and you're like, you fluctuate between like, oh, I like Miguel now, and I like and it's like all, and then we have Gwen coming in, and it's like, well, you know, I remember when I first saw the movie for the first time, I'm like, Gwen's my favorite now, and then last night I'm watching, and I'm like, I think it's Miles now, you know, and then but that's healthy, that's good, that's good for everything.
Yeah.
And you know what it takes when you talked about when you said wave. It takes years and it takes waves of new voices to come to the party. Yeah. At the beginning, there was a very small number of people who wanted to tell superhero stories or make Marvel stories. And over the years, through different on-ramps, whether it's the X-Men cartoon, no matter what it is, the more we can bring new waves of people and have different voices and points of view, and that is when we get the authenticity. And someone comes in and says, you don't know what you're doing. It may be unintentional, but let me point out, can you, what would you like, you know, how can we get it right?
But it doesn't even have to be voiced as a criticism. I just say, like, it's not you're doing it wrong, just make it doper. Yeah. Like the same thing that our own crews tell us when we're making the movie. What did they say when Mumbattan wasn't coming together? The Indian animators got together, sent us an email. Make it doper. It's not dope enough.
Nothing makes me happier than knowing that people are really, you know, that they love Miles and that they find him like cooler than Peter. And I've often found that fans are, I think maybe if you grew up with the comics, you love Peter Parker. But I've met a lot of people who don't know anything about Spider-Man, like didn't grow up with Spider-Man. But then Miles Morales is the one that they love, and I just love that about it. Miles Morales is fun for us to work on because I like that he's really fresh and he's younger, he's more youthful. We can do more with his fashion, we can do more with his, you know, his animations. And I just feel like there's more freedom in exploring who he is, especially that because he's younger as well in our universe.
It's another place where people can, you know, draw into it. Like, how am I going to put this? So, I was a really awkward kid as I start to stutter. And when you're awkward and you mess up and you're insecure, you don't see a future for yourself. You don't see how you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer or a police officer like my father was. And you might not necessarily be good at anything yet. And when someone creates a character that you see yourself in, and that character is aspirational, you can start to see a future for yourself. You know? So if whatever it is we're making, that's our great responsibility, is to make that place where someone young and insecure and doesn't see a future for themselves goes, that's mine. I'm gonna cry.
When I was a kid, I didn't want to be Spider-Man, I wanted to be Peter Parker. Because like you, he showed me a possibility.
Yeah, he's a big kid. You wanted to be a big kid so bad.
So he gives, the wonderful thing about these characters is they give young people an idea of a possibility. I could be like that.
Can I tell you too, one of the best things I saw on the internet for the first game was a fan actually sent me a selfie of themselves, and they were saying, it's my first day of school, guess who I'm dressed up as? And he dressed up as Peter Parker.
Wow.
Yeah. And I just remember being really touched because, you know, everyone really likes the Spider-Man suits, but the fact that
it was Peter
kid
Parker
in high school wanted to dress up as Peter made me feel like we had done our jobs.
That's awesome. That's great.
Really early on, you know, like I said, there's been so many movies, so many comics, so many games. We're like, how are we gonna make this game resonate with the most passionate Spider-Man fans or Marvel fans out there? But like, how are we gonna surprise them? And I kind of created this phrase of respect the DNA of the franchise, but don't be afraid to mix things up. And we've kind of taken that philosophy the entire time. And how can we bring that? Because we all know these fans are really, really passionate and they have a lot of thoughts. And I mean that in a great way. And people are like, do you ever get tired of it? I'm like, no, because if they stop talking about it, that's even worse. That's worse than like, you know, like I didn't like it. And I think we've done that, whether it's, you know, Miles and, you know, the Miles game completely rethought of how we thought of the Tinkerer. And then obviously with Spider-Man 2, you know, we have a very popular character that people care a lot about in Venom. And we're like, okay, what's the part of and Jacinda and I and Bobby and I talk about this all the time, is like, all right, what are the characteristics of the character that if we don't have, we should hide. We should hide.
Right.
And it's like, okay, so Venom, you want him big. You want the teeth. He's got to sound like Tony Todd. He's got to have those great symbiote powers, just overwhelming strength, and like someone like Pete could never just, it's going to be hard for him to take down, or Pete and Miles take down. But I'm like, okay, what's our change? Well, who is he bond with? What's that relationship that we can bring? And I think we're always looking for those things. And I think thinking about me being a fan of the Spider-Verse films, I think what the first Spider-Verse film did for me was it gave me more confidence that we could even go further.
Right.
We
Yeah.
can continue to push, because like
Right.
I'm in awe of your risk taking. Those films, from the first one and the second one, there's a lot of big swings.
Well, I think that's a really good segue into our North Star. Our North Star was, for this second one, was you have to tell your own story.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about canon events that try and like say that things have to be a certain way.
Yeah.
And here's this whole Spider-Verse, like all these characters that are telling Miles how things are supposed to be for him, and how these events are supposed to go, how your suit's supposed to look, how the style of your universe is supposed to look, how everything. And we challenged it on every level to tell our own story and to tell Miles' story, and that he would find a way in every situation. Again, it's that affirmation he gets from his parents, that the things that he was taught by them, they're the most valuable. And she makes him promise before he leaves, you got to promise me you won't forget.
Right? Yeah.
You won't forget where you came from and what you've learned here, and that you have a place to come to, and to never let them tell you who you are.
Right.
And so that idea that you have to tell your own story, I think it sort of infected us across every level of our storytelling and our picture, because, and it's sort of like, well, we can't do things the way we've seen them before.
But I have to say, because one thing I'm both so in awe of but jealous of is that if you look at the Spider-Verse films, they are so comic book. Like that is like a comic. There is so much complexity and comic. But I think back to rewatching the second film last night, and the conversation you just mentioned with Rio and Miles. It's such a human, relatable, like that's what
gets you
that's what a
through
mom and
all
a
the
son would
stuff.
talk about.
Yeah.
And it wrap up in all of this crazy Spider-Verse and Tyrannosaurus Rex, dinosaur spider. There's this fundamental of like.
It makes me so happy to hear you say that.
I mean,
I'm just like.
That's.
By the way, I just want you
right?
stop making our job so hard.
Oh, please.
That's what I want to say. Stop it.
Well, that's an internal motto is exactly that, is what do? We're going to tell epic stories with the human heart.
Yeah.
That's what Marvel has been for decades. That's what defines a Marvel story. So it's all those moments of Miles talking to his mom.
Yeah.
All those it's almost like when you read a magazine about movie stars, and there'll be a section called Celebrities. They're just like us.
Right.
That's what Marvel is.
Right.
Superheroes, specifically Spider-Man.
It's true.
Just like us.
Well, I will say, I think as a fan of the content, and one that was a fan long before I ever got in the industry, and you can like sniff when things are not authentic. There was a time when comic book films were starting to become more prominent. It almost seemed like the filmmakers were embarrassed by the comic book origins, and everybody was clad in really dark leathers because bright colors wouldn't work. And I get it. It was sort of a sort of nurturing process for the audience, but I think to understand the truth of the characters, it's the humanity that really brings you in and hooks you, and it's not that it gets you through all the crazy stuff, because I love all the crazy stuff, but that's the North Star for the audience to interact with the T-Rex and go like, Miles is worried about getting back home right now.
Well, we in a way something we talked a lot about throughout all the games is we wanted to see their lives when they weren't wearing the suit. Like, and we do a lot of missions, playable, like not just cinematic,
honestly,
playable
just
missions.
walking around in the apartment
And,
is a big
like,
deal.
you know, and sometimes, obviously it's really exciting to see Pete and Miles swinging around and fighting a giant Sandman, right? But the thing we talk about a lot on the team is, in order to care about the stuff in the suit, you got to care about the stuff outside. You got to show the stuff that happens outside the suit, because that stuff means more in the suit. If the stuff you got to have both. A
punch lands harder with more consequence if you understand what's happening outside. Look, even going through the apartment and like flipping through the records, I was like, okay, this is. I'm feeling the texture of this world. I could get a sense for what Miles was going through.
Yeah, I love that you guys put so much energy into letting me feel each space like so fully, and that I could immerse myself in the lives of these characters. And it was just really like, and we were trying to do the same thing, and I love that you can actually inhabit and feel like you're actually getting to be in the shoes of these characters. You guys really put a lot into that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And I was going to say too, I was so impressed by the movie because you put so much in so little amount of time. Because even every time you introduced a new Spider, and you did those really quick, montages of like, who is the Spider-Man that I'm talking to? And I was like, oh my God, this is going 90 miles an hour. And I was like, oh, I get it. I understand what they're trying to tell me. And then the other thing that totally blew my mind too is just the fact that, for us, like our game was so challenging because we had to deal with symbiotes, Sandman, you name it, big things. But the fact that you're able to do that many artistic styles to represent every single character like blew my mind. Like it was such a crazy flex because as I was watching it, I was like, again, another one? This is insane. There's like 10 movies in one movie. This is incredible.
I think if you're gonna say like everyone can wear the mask, anyone can wear the mask, and you have to write your own story, I think you have to show that. I don't think you can just say it. And I think when you say anyone can wear the mask, we sort of like almost created a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, it was sort of like challenge accepted.
Yeah.
It helps because the step ups in technology are kind of incremental. So it helps to go back, like I started in games 24 years ago, and what you could do was incredibly limited. You were lucky if an animated character had fingers, like that you could pose, or a bone past the ankle. And definitely facial animation was limited. Sometimes, if you're lucky, there was a jaw to flap. And so if you look at that, and then you kind of look at where we are now, I mean, just coming from Spider-Man 1 to Spider-Man 2, the leap is still pretty incredible. Like the speed with which we can move through the environment is ray traced, even if you're over the top of New York. These are things you could have good ideas when you were a young person, but they're not possible. So stop talking. You're gonna have to get much more clever and scrappy with what you're doing. And now we can say those crazy things out loud and maybe pull it off, So I think that's one of the biggest differences. And it really helps everything. Like underneath the characters, the number of blend shapes running in a face is just science fiction compared to what we could do. Remember, it's still rendered in real time. Ziva, full muscle deformations, like a lot more collaboration with art and visual effects just to make a character exist. Whereas, back in the day, it was kind of like NASCAR. It was, a couple, just a few vertices and okay texture. These things are incredible works of art, and the fact that they run in real time and get lit with ray tracing and real-time shadows is phenomenal. It's just ridiculously awesome. I think it's easy even for us to forget, when we have that scene, everyone meets and the entire cast is on screen with all of their high resolution heads, outdoors, real-time, shadows. And it's just stunning what people far more talented than me have enabled us to be able to play around with and just, make it the Marvel way or whatever. But I mean, without them, there's none of this,
Earlier we were talking about films, video games, and how, say for films, for example, what was done before with superheroes. And now, it's in the last 10, 20 years, and now, and this applies to games, film, we're getting more and more and more amazing visuals, and then we can do more superhero stories. But for the longest time, tech wasn't there. Tech, what was drawn on the page in comic books for a time, was more amazing than you could see in any film.
Right. Yeah.
And it took a while for technology to catch up. And it was different companies, different heroes. But now finally, tech has caught up to our inner dreams of when we were kids and we read comics and it's static images, but in our minds, we're almost turning it into a movie. What's happening between the panels? How is this moving? And it needed two things. It needed the technology, and it needed generations of fans who love this stuff and who now somehow find ourselves in the position to make these things and make decisions. And when you have that combination of creators who grew up with it, who loved it, who's dying for a chance to show the world why did I name my son Peter? We can say, here's why. Amazing creators who love it, and now we have the technology to deliver what was in our mind's eye in 3D for the world to see.
Yeah.
Why did you name your son Peter?
Well,
but also I have to echo. I mean, a lot of this. You know, I made a couple films before the first Spider-Verse film and the second one, and the technology definitely wasn't there. Right. So much of it is, I feel, honestly, like an embarrassment of riches, of opportunities that have kind of come together in this incredible way where, I mean, just like this incredible web of life and destiny that's sort of like come together to this perfect confluence of events that, you know, allowed us to have the technology was available when the opportunity to make this film was available. Because as much as I love designing for designing's sake, and you can't get me to learn my alphabets, you know, because I'd rather be drawing, like as much as that might be true, I never want to do anything just for the sake of it. The story that we had to tell really did require this technology. We couldn't have told this story the way we told it 10 years ago. Right. We couldn't have told it 20 years ago, 30 years ago. All those advances had to be made. You had to invent Blender, you had to invent Rebel, you had to invent all these different software packages, and we had to have geniuses at ImageWorks, Sony Pictures ImageWorks, who've been like writing code and shaders for like decades and building and all the rigging software that has had to get to the point, you know, like you're saying, you know, like, to rig something as complicated as Olivia Octavius's, you know, sort of tentacles that were like these soft robotics, you know, that are sort of pulsing and breathing the whole time while they're, I mean, there's thousands of rig points that the animators were controlling there. And the fact that it's all possible, that we could think of all these different characters, but also that you had a story that said, hey, what if, and we just that had that proposition in it, what if everybody could wear the Spider-Man mask? What if everybody could wear the mask? And okay, is the technology there? And the fact that it was there, honestly, the technology is not only there, but if anything, it actually forced us to sometimes be responsible.
It did. I will say that one of the lucky things that we had as directors was, I can use Photoshop. That's as far as I go. Yeah. We got to talk, go into a room, look at these beautiful images, and talk to what maybe 20 years ago would have been very tech-minded people as artists.
Right.
And they responded as artists, and it was about the art. It wasn't, they would figure out how whatever needed to be designed to achieve the thing that we were talking about. But it was always art first.
Absolutely.
And that was really, I think, refreshing and exciting and freeing, because we were all coming from this really, really creative place first. And then, stuff would run through its paces, and then we would start getting really responsible, like, hey.
But from what you're saying, I mean, it's absolutely true. Like, when I did production design on the first 3D animated film, every conversation was like, here's what we could do.
Right.
Yeah.
Every conversation is like, well, that's great. All right, there's some things you need to understand about how the computer works.
Yeah.
And before now, so let's lower your expectations.
Right.
Not in a way, and then it forces you to be creative in a different way.
Sure.
Okay, and you make great choices with the limitations. Here, because we almost had no limitations, then it was like, okay, which choices would act, and for the first time we were talking with our artists about which choices would be the best to tell this story.
Just story.
Purely as a story and creative conversation. And I think it was a revolutionary way for us to approach it, and it honestly, these like bold choices, it was harder to like stop ourselves than it was to like we didn't have to, everybody just said, yeah, we can do that.
Right.
Oh yeah, we could do that.
Right, Jacinda? It's interesting because, I'm like you, I like maybe basic Photoshop, and it's like really smart people who tell me, and I go, well, that looks cool. Can we make it 5% cooler? Can we 10% cooler? And I think what we kind of did on, Spider-Man 1 was like, let's just start off, like, it was like, we thought of it as like, this is our Iron Man. Like, let's get it right out of the gate so we can hopefully do more of these. And then we did Miles, which was so much fun. And I think for a lot of us was just like one of those projects I think we'll never forget. And then with Spider-Man 2, it's like, we're just gonna go a lot bigger. And we had a lot of conversations. I'm like, well, can we do this? Can we do this? Bobby, can we have a giant Sandman? Can we have, how many tendrils can we have coming off the symbiote arm and stuff like that? And I think for me, I would say, I'm the one who's like, oh, can we try this? Can we try that? But then what's really exciting is having an idea, but then you hand it to Bobby, Jacinda, and their team, and they go, yeah, that's cool, Bryan, but we actually can make it even cooler. Yeah. And then it's like infinitely, like, I think back to like just Venom, and starting off with like, does Venom smile? Does Venom, having these 2D drawings, and then all of a sudden, later we're talking about how much drool is coming off, and does the drool react realistically, and wait, and then, okay, we're gonna remove the drool for this scene, we're not gonna have it for this scene, and then just letting like people like Bobby and his team just go, why am I saying anything? Just cook, just go. Just go.
Yeah, we spent, well, for me, I've spent at least, almost 5 years, I guess, thinking about Venom and the symbiotes and how to, depict them. And I just remember when we first started, the symbiote's kind of like a shapeshifter, right? That it could become anything. And even really early on in R&D and pre-production, we had to think about what the rules were, because originally we actually had these tentacle creatures that could be almost anything. They're all black, they're these blob monsters. And we ended up switching directions because you started realizing that if it could be anything, it's really nothing. So, okay, fine. So now you have to refine it a bit more. So then we started making up rules, and we were like, well, if you're a symbiote, does the symbiote always have a host? And then if it's got a host, can it be an animal? Can it be a quadruped? Can it be an octopus? Is it only a human? So then we started squeezing it down some more. And ultimately, because we want to tell a human story, we said, okay, it's going to be humans. They're going to bond with humans. And then from there, it starts expanding because, we have symbiotes who are the enemies. We have Venom. We have characters who become symbiotized, like MJ, Harry, and Peter. And then we start covering the entire city with symbiotes and tentacles and things like that. So I looked at the comics, and I looked at all the various depictions of the symbiotes and Venom, and even the tentacles, and I was pretty impressed, because once you dig really deep into it, you'll see that the style and the way that all the artists have interpreted these characters and the materials is very different. Sometimes the tentacles are really fine and smooth and curvy, and other times they're very angular and they're very thick. And we had to really think about how to make a creature or creatures who are both changeable, but strong at the same time. So we spent a lot of time also looking then at the materials because, is it going to be like black paint? Is it going to be like black slime? And then ultimately we picked something that was in between. So it looks, like it's again not too heavy, not too thick. So it looks like an alien material. But then the tendrils themselves were like a huge headache because they're tendrils, but they're also sentient. So some of this is solved with animation, which is what Bobby and his team did an incredible job of. But then some of it would have to be solved with technology because when we do all the transformations, when Harry becomes Venom, things like that, that's way too many tentacles for an animator to animate by hand. So then we start getting into simulations. Yeah. So we started doing simulations on how the tentacles would behave. But then the problem with that is because we're trying to simulate something that doesn't exist in real life, you can't just say, well, it's just going to behave like water, or it's going to behave like slime or something. So then we end up doing simulations, but then there's a lot of art direction. And I think I've spent the last 8 months of productions just drawing tentacles. Wow. Tentacles animating, tentacles moving, tentacles wrapping around things. And we were doing that, I think, until the day we shipped. We're still working on tentacles.
Sure. Are you giving it a base sim and then going on top of that and giving it the personality on top of like what the base sim would do?
Well, we had a base simulation, but from there you had to then art direct it by using various inputs because the Houdini artists are basically they're technical. Yeah. They're not hand animating it. Right. So you have to draw over and tell them, hey, I want these tentacles to do this. And they're adjusting numbers to get them to behave the way.
Those shapes.
Yeah.
And then she's got me going, is it done yet?
Yeah.
Is it gonna look, it's gonna look good, right? It's gonna look good. And she's like, just shut up.
Yeah.
Well, what I hoped everyone noticed after the game out is how many people love your version of Venom.
Yeah.
Because Venom is a character. There are certain characters at Marvel where people don't like any other superhero. They just like Venom.
That's their one.
So whether it's Wolverine, Venom, Ghost Rider, it's usually these characters with attitude. But when you look at them, you don't have to know anything else. Yeah. The design is so strong, it speaks to you with this attitude. And I think the reason why it resonated with people is because of all those discussions we had. You understood there's all these things you can do with Venom, but what is Venom about? Right. Venom part is the boogeyman, part is dark reflection of Peter, part is addiction. And did I say body horror? Body horror, what is happening to you. Right. So when you make it human and it's changing, it has that effect. So it's all that understanding of the core of the character. And as long as you have that, then you can start expanding, but it all feels right because the players, the audience, know that you get it.
It's also one of the reasons why I was so petrified to get the character right. That's why we cast the voice of Venom last, because I was like, this is too much pressure. It's too much pressure. Because that voice is a signature thing, and you're like, what? Because if he doesn't sound, he has to look right, but if he doesn't sound right, you get worried. And I remember working with one of our dialogue managers, and I was like, just what if it was like someone like Tony Todd, like a Tony Todd voice, not thinking we would ever get Tony. And then Patrick, our dialogue manager, goes a couple weeks later, goes, "You're not going to believe this, but I have a audition recording from Tony." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, it's really bad. Like in terms of he just did it on his phone, but we got all these other ones to listen to, and so I listened to all the other ones purposely because I was like, it's gonna be him. And he said 2 lines. I'm like, just give him the job. Just get it. And then it's like, and that was kind of like the cherry on top of like everything. It was like we had the story we wanted to tell with Pete, Harry, and the symbiote. We had the character design. We started seeing how the tech was going to work, and then the voice coming online. And I remember him recording his first, recording those first lines for that reveal trailer where he just says, "Yes, we will," and it's like you're like,
chills.
"Oh yeah,
total
this
chills."
Great. It was so much fun. Those are the kind of things. As hard as all this is, like those are the memories you just try to remember. It's like those just when that thing finally clicks. and it's just awesome.
And then, like you said, once Venom became pretty much human, that was actually good news for us animation-wise, because we know this. So we could, just make sure that people believed that character. They believe him physically, they believe him emotionally. They hear that voice and it comes from that body, as much as we can. So if we can get everyone to believe in it. And then exactly what Jacinda said, it took the entire studio to make symbiotic effects. Like, there's no one person who gets to take credit on that one. Animation-wise, there was a lot of really scrappy, old-school animating of tubes for years.
Yep.
And so a lot of that stuff is that, but there's so much more that ended up going on top of it. Things that you're like, really? We're gonna have that? And it worked, and it did all come together in the end. It was quite late, and we were all stressed out and tired, but it was good. Like the whole team came together and made that character as believably as we can at this day and age. So.
We didn't have Venom in our movie, so there were no creative challenges.
Well, I will say what's interesting is that, you said looking at the different comics that Venom was in and the different artists that would handle him. That's, I think, the unique thing about comics is that it's interpreted month to month sometimes by different artists. Yep. And it's, I think, your understanding of what makes the character work. You might not be able to honor every single artist's interpretation of it, but understanding what makes it unique and what your mind's eye saw while reading those comics, it comes across.
Well, it was interesting, like, when we started working on Spider-Man, I assumed everybody was like me. It was like action figures, comics,
right,
and then TV shows, movies, and then, and it was like, oh no, I came in from that way. I came in from this way. I never read a comic. I only saw, and it's kind of that same thing of like, at the end of the day, what are the common characteristics between all those different mediums that we want to get? And that's the same thing, like now when we talk about a particular character like Venom.
But even though he wasn't in our movie, there actually were a few creative challenges. Actually, one of the biggest things that we had to overcome, like constantly, was how much we had to balance, putting, there's a lot of spectacle in our movie.
Yeah.
Yep. Like if we stand back, like Joaquim and I, we stand way back, like one of the, like in Kemp, we would be standing from that bird's eye, mile high view. There's a lot of spectacle we put into this movie, and trying to decide like how much of it to put in so we didn't overwhelm our characters. And it's like you guys are saying, like, wow, you put so much into this movie. And that's what I keep saying, is like, we almost had too much power.
Yeah.
We almost had too much, like, unlimited, like, and we had this embarrassment of riches. And the idea creatively that, like, there'd be all this incredible crashing and bashing, but at the same time, we had to make sure that you could follow Miles in his emotional journey, and that he wouldn't get lost, and that the characters, wouldn't be swallowed up by all this spectacle, and that you could track what was going on. And then we had all these like complicated, I remember for the longest time, all of our creative challenges were story.
Yeah.
It was almost like technology for the first time wasn't our limitation.
Right.
Honestly,
technology was sort of waiting us to go like, all right, guys, come on.
What do you guys want to do? And we're like, oh no, we're used to being backed into choices. Here it was like, no, we can do anything.
First of all, we're fans of the films. Like, we really, like, hopefully I hear it talk, like, I love it, and I love that, and we, in the first game, we were like, hey, we'll do all these suits. People love suits. Well, there's these really cool suits from this first film. Can we get them in the game? And then obviously when we made Miles, we took it a step further. We're like, we're going to do the suits, and we're going to try to emulate the animation style. And I think for me, seeing that, in 9 years of working on this franchise, that's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. That not only did someone have the idea to do that, but like, we worked with all of your team and our animators going, we can make the whole city feel like it normally does, but this character is going to animate differently. And then I remember, we were working on Spider-Man. Well, we done the suits. We did the suits plus animation. we got to step it up even more. And I remember sitting on multiple calls with both of you and Kemp and going like, well, what can we do? And we batted around a ton of ideas. And I actually remember being in Washington, D.C. at my in-laws' house, and we did a Zoom, and I was like, we're trying to figure out what we could do. And I was like, well, we have these spider bots.
Yeah.
We have these spider bots. Is there any, because like we had this really, we used, in Spider-Man 1, we had these backpacks, and everybody loved collecting the backpacks. It kind of told, like, you could learn more about Peter's 8 years of being Spider-Man through the backpacks. And we're like, we want that kind of collectible. And we're like, well, Pete and Miles have these spider bots, let's named after them. Well, what if they were spider bots from all over the multiverse? And we're like, and I remember going like, what do you think? And then you guys brought up a character that didn't make it into the film, and we're like, well, what if you collect all the bots and then you get this like location? And we had even Genki involved in it, and it just kind of, I think what we did with the spider bots is a good example of like how we make games. Everything's just collaboration, trading different ideas.
And we love that because the goal is always in the game. Whenever there's side missions, side quests, we don't want the player to feel like, why did you make me do this? This has nothing to do with anything else. So the goal is always, here's the main mission. If we have a side mission, how can we make it connect either thematically to the main story, or it echoes ideas, or it reveals more about character? And in the first game with the backpacks, that came from, well, if I was Spider-Man, on rooftops, I would leave myself backpacks. I would have a power bar, I would have water in it, I would have first aid. That's a very Spider-Man thing.
Makes sense.
He's not a billionaire with his cave. He's running around the city, so he would have to store these backpacks. So then as a player, yes, it's a side quest. Yes, you're gaining points, but you're learning more about Peter. And that's something that Spider-Man would do. When you told me the Spider-Bot idea, it's like, yes, because as you say, what do we care about? Story.
Yeah.
And you had these Spider-Bots. Here's a Spider-Bot that is themed to Spider-Man 2099.
Yeah.
Why would this be in our world? So then when you came with the story idea, it's like, great, you can just play this side quest and collect it, and that's cool, but you added that layer of story. And then if you go and play it, there's a connection.
There's a direct connection.
Yeah.
Well,
to the film.
Well, the other thing was, I will tell you guys, I haven't told you guys the story, but I remember, so I'm working one night and I get a phone call, and it's from Yuri Lowenthal, who plays Peter Parker. And he goes, I gotta tell you what I just did. I'm like, what? He's like, I just recorded lines for the movie. and I know Yuri really well, and I could just sense the smile he had on his face. That he got to be part of it. And just, I think that's the thing. I think we always look at how can we, first of all, like we all know we're working on complicated things that take a lot of time to make, and we also don't want to do something that like makes it harder for you to explain in the movie. Same thing with the game. Sure. We want it to be, if you know, you know, and then, but there's a little bit extra. And I think to see the cross collaboration between the team, and I remember we must have done like 4 or 5 different meetings of finally getting on this, figuring like how can we make it work? Because like I'm like, well, we want to do more, but like we're running out, we got to get this game done, and you guys, well, we got to get this film done, and it's like we're kind of going back and forth, and I feel like it's just one of those things where you look back and you're like, I can't believe we were able to do that and have that kind of collaboration.
I will say I think it's generational, because I've been around long enough now to have worked for the previous couple generations where there was just this like, I don't even want to call it like a competitive nature, but there was sort of this separation where it was like, no, that thing's tied up in this thing, you can't do it. If you want to do it, as a fan, and the fans want to see it, and you can do it right, and you can do justice, and you're not doing it as this sort of throwaway, then it's worth doing, it's worth exploring, and it's worth maybe staying up a couple extra days to make it happen.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was going to say that was, I can't believe we pulled it off because it came in so late. And I remember when Bryan told us, he's like, okay, we're going to do this crossover, but don't worry, we've got some assets from the animation. Right. And we're like, oh, okay. Get the animation assets, and we're like, okay, we can't use this.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you everyone. So what we ended up doing was we took what we could use, and then we had to rebuild it. But then, because we can't take a lot of the animation assets, we actually then would look at trailers of the game, and then we've asked for stills from you guys and just said, okay, how do we put this thing together? And then same thing with the spider bots, because at the time that wasn't something that we said we were going to do, and we had no who was going to do the spider bots. We'd only built one that was part of the original gameplay. And we were racking our brains trying to figure it out. But one of the artists who worked on the spider bot was just like, oh, you mean like this? And he just did a paint. And all of a sudden you're like, is that a J. Jonah Jameson spider bot, a little mustache?
Yes, it is.
And then it seemed like every couple of days he was just like, oh, I just did this on my lunch break. I just did this whatever. And all the spider bots in the game were actually done by this one artist. And I guess it kind of goes to show that if you're having fun, it's not work.
I think that's the key.
Because it was completely unexpected. We were trying to figure out how to do it. And he just said, this is the best thing ever. And he was so passionate about it.
And I love that some of the same artists that worked on the film got to collaborate with you guys on the game, and I know there's animators that have also worked on the movie.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's just wonderful that there's this there's this universe of people that are sort of connected and passionate about these characters.
It was actually, obviously when the game comes out, you start to follow certain people, and they, the social media, they'll post about their experience. And I was tracking Chris and where he was and when he was playing, and he's like, I just saw something, I can't believe it's in the game. And I was like, oh, it's the Spider-Verse connection. That's when he got to the finale, that's the thing he's talking about.
Well, I'll tell you that hearing all the last minute scrambling and all the hustle and all the collaboration, it paid off. I'll tell you this. For the Marvel Games team, as we're getting closer and closer to your movie's premiere and different posters were coming out, individually, this is all, we weren't back in the office again, we're all in COVID and we're all separated, but we're all individually scanning each poster. And when we would all see our Spider-Man with the white spider, we would instantly take a picture, share it with each other, and we'd say, we exist.
That's amazing.
And eventually when we were in the theater, I was mentioning earlier, I was sitting there, and when that scene happened, I couldn't help myself. I was alone, but I pointed. And I said, that's our Spider-Man. So when you talked about telling your own story, in a way, you told our story.
Yeah.
And so we saw ourselves
That's awesome.
in the poster, in the movie. We said, we existed. We created something that is being added to the toy chest, and you embraced it. And to see that circle of life, we all look at the comics, we create things, we get inspired, then the people that, then it goes back, people who make the comics see what we do and put it into the comics, they look at what you're doing in the film, and this whole interchange of ideas and cool stuff is so cool to see, and it says to the audience, maybe those 13-year-old kids like we were, sitting at home and saying, I want to do that. When they see how much we work together and that we're all fans and we put our fandom on screen, and then hopefully the next generation says, I want to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
And going even further, I think the fact that we we saw that relationship build with the audience too from the first film. So in the second film, we were actually even more prepared for that. And even while we were making the first film, seeing that what are people out in the audience passionate about that we don't even know about, and getting people to watching people get excited. And knowing that you got excited to see yourselves represented and see people's favorite Spider
and people on our crew that
up.
were playing your game while they were working on the film. We almost put one of your guys' glitches that made it into we almost put a heater, like a space heater, swinging through.
Yes, from the Miles game, there was a space heater. Well, there's a cube one in this game, so we fixed that. But there's
plenty
a
of
cube. We call them
fodder
Spider
now,
Cube, Spider Cube, right?
But I think the fact that we had a crew member that brought that up and said, what about if there's a space heater? That's true love.
Yeah.
It's also on I think definitely when we made the first film, we, beyond even these beautiful stories that you guys are telling about individuals. I think we didn't even realize before that first movie came out, and certainly we felt it the entire time we were making this movie, how important Miles Morales became to an entire culture of people around the world. And it was almost overwhelming to feel that on the first movie. I remember we were making it and we were like, this is really cool. Like, I love this. But the tears that people would come up to us with, and the representation that people felt, and just how powerful it was for them. And then on the second film, we knew we had to do more. We knew that, you know, if we had to live up to this idea that we had established that anyone can wear the mask.
Yeah.
And it was an incredible gift, and it was an incredible challenge, but it was an important one that I think we all took with us into this and said, we can do even more, and we can show even more and create even more of that feeling, and still put Miles at the center of it, because we had this, you know, we had to make sure it was still his movie, you know, and somehow all of that was such a huge challenge, but it was the most worthwhile, amazing thing that I think I've ever gotten to be a part of. And then it was incredible to see when this film came out, there were things that you didn't even know if people would see. You didn't even know if people would notice.
Right. Yeah.
There were things we put so far in the background, because there's hundreds of spider people. There's things we did so quickly and so fast, and you know, whether they're little Easter eggs or whether they're like, but we learned on the first film that these fans really are paying attention in a way that I don't think I was prepared for.
I don't think we had an ability with CRT TVs to pay attention, because the fidelity just wasn't there. It was like a fuzzy thing that we would like, you couldn't catch it.
Kemp, what was it like for you, who didn't work on the first film, to now join? Like, what kind of pressure? What was it like for you to now join and go? I mean, because that film was so well received, won all the awards. Now you're coming and joining. Like, what was it like for you to join that team?
It was exciting, but it was also like, I don't want to do anything they did in the first film.
Yep.
That was my attitude from the get-go. Anything,
that was all our attitudes.
Anything was just like, anything from the first film, everything that people loved, we loved it too, and we don't want to do any of that.
Yeah.
And
we
I have
do
to
something
say,
completely different.
And I have to say, like I was so glad when they were my fellow director, that I got to make a movie with them, because I wouldn't have wanted to work on the second one if they said, can you just do more of that? Yeah. The fact that they were like, we're all three gonna lock arms and we're not gonna do anything we did before.
Yeah. And we didn't, like, I'll speak to one specific thing that I love so much about what we did do with our film, and it really goes back to comic books. In the first film, at the very end, Miguel O'Hara first shows up. And then, of course, he's in our film. Miguel looks completely different.
He does.
Yeah.
We don't explain it.
That's right.
His costume is different. Other than Oscar Isaac's voice, Lila looks different. Yeah. When you read comic books and a new artist comes on, your characters just look different.
Yeah.
It's the hand of a new artist. You know what I mean? When you go from Jim Byrne to Paul Smith, suddenly characters have different hairstyles.
That's right.
Yeah.
And everything we tried to do was like, we're going to show the world that these are the hands of different artists. This isn't the same team. Phil and Chris are still involved, but like, let's just don't explain it. It's a comic book. The hands of a new artist are going to give you something that looks different. Even Miles's world, which was our template in the first film, that's a world that's established. Justin can confirm, we rebuilt it from the ground up. It doesn't even look the same. Miles' world in our film doesn't look the same as Miles' world in the first film. It's our version of it.
But that's what you love about, you know, telling these stories and bringing on new creative voices. You want it to feel different.
Yeah.
And I think
That's how you get the best comics, right? And Phil and Chris are fantastic at
allowing that to happen. You know, they sort of they bring new voices in, and they let those voices be heard. I mean, look, I think there's also an inherent thing that happens with your guys' games specifically, is that, you know, my wife's not a gamer. She appreciates all the stuff that we do. She appreciates the creativity, but my kid, it's like a visualized wish fulfillment. You know, when I'm playing that game, like, she stops in her tracks and she goes, all right, what's going on? Are you controlling this right now? Like, she doesn't, that thing, it again, it expands and it opens up to feeling an emotion that isn't necessarily tied to a narrative, a specific narrative. It's a thing that's inside of us that you guys are able to tap into, that I mean, maybe the movies do on some level, they let a certain level of freedom, but that to me is like an intangible. That's like something that it's unique to you guys, it's unique to your industry.
Yeah, I think for me, when I think about Greater Together, I think back to something I said earlier, was what I really don't think we set out, but ended up being, was that the Pete Miles relationship probably for me ended up being the strongest relationship in the game, because of how much their relationship evolves through some good times, but also some bad times, where it was Peter being there for Miles at the start, where Miles is more for Peter at the end, and they grow. And I think about my time in Insomniac and working with these two over here for now, 15 years and over 10 years with this one, and thinking about, I would, I hate when say like, oh, you're the creative director, you're the one with the vision. No, that's a title.
Right.
But the truth is, I'm a better Insomniac and a better creative director because of these two. I'm a better person because of these two, because Bobby's the one who's sitting there going to a meeting going, hey, Bryan, like, enough is enough, or like Jacinda saying like, hey, I think we should do it this way. And I hope, what I love is that for me, the game represents what it feels like to be part of this team and this group. Like, I mean, I spend as much time with them as I do my real family. They are my family.
Yeah.
I would stand in front of a bus for them. And I love how they've made a little kid's dreams come true.
That's beautiful, man.
Yeah, now I was gonna just wrap it up too for the three of us, because for me, Be Greater Together does refer to our core group, and it's not just us three. It's there's more to them than obviously our entire team.
Sure.
But I mean, we've been with this franchise, same people for like 8 years,
9 years,
living this, and I feel like that's pretty unusual, in media or any great franchise, to have the same people. And these projects are, I mean, you all know you're creative people too. It's like they take a lot out of you personally, mentally, emotionally, but I think having people around you to like help you, and to understand what you're going through, but then also to make you a better, creator too, is something that's really unique in, it's really unique to me in the industry. That's what I feel, at least. And I feel very fortunate every day, to be working with you guys and, the rest of the team.
In the end, I mean, we are only as good as the people we work with.
100%.
And we are only as good as the effort and the artistry and the passion of those people that we are surrounding ourselves with. And I don't think the three of us could take credit for anything that's really on screen truly without mentioning that there were 1,000 people. That
literally.
Actually,
100% that.
That actually, made us greater. We were greater together. And, I sometimes think like, funny way, of the analogy of like, there's this like invisible dartboard that I can somehow see somewhere out there, that Kemp can see, that Joaquim can see, and we give 1,000 darts to people, and there's 1,000 people who give 1,000 darts, and they all stand up to throw it, and our job is simply to just go a little bit this way, a little bit that way. Okay, now let go, and then okay, here's another one. All right, a little bit this way, a little bit that way. But honestly, they're the one throwing the darts. They're the ones hitting the bullseyes.
Yep.
And we're not doing any of that other than trying to nudge the hand, the arm a little bit closer to that target that we're seeing out there. But they're the ones who make it possible even for us to see what's in our head. Yes. And they're the ones that really, their faith in us and the fact that we do think of ourselves as a family of artists who are working together, and their faith in us is a huge, immense responsibility. And I think we constantly would have to mention and thank them, and constantly we would go to them and say, how can we do this? And is there a way we can do this better? Is there, hey, come to us, we give you permission, tell us how this could actually get even bigger, better. What can you add to it? Because I'll let you throw the dart.
And by the way, it's okay to fail. We're gonna fail plenty, and that's what's gonna allow us to find the light.
I always joke, this failure is just one step closer to success.
That's it.
It's just you gotta go through that. And I would never ever fault someone for trying something and it didn't work.
Yeah.
That's creative. That's just creative kryptonite. You gotta let people go big, go bold, especially if they're passionate about it. If they're in, if they get excited about it, like with the spider bots, you just let them go.
Yeah.
Because what they're going to bring back is beyond anything you ever could have expected.
That's
right. When you are talking about these big themes of family and responsibility and destiny, it reminds me of something I learned from Stan Lee, who co-created almost all the characters. Not only did he say, hey, every comic could be someone's first comic, which guided us on how do we make the story. What does that mean? It means welcome everyone. Yeah. Make it as accessible as possible. There's no level of fan. We're all fans. Yeah. He also said, at Marvel, what do we do? We're storytellers. And sometimes when you first get to Marvel and you'll be asked, what kind of stories does Marvel tell? And you may say, oh, we tell superhero stories. We say, yes, but underneath that, what do? We tell moral fables. Every story is about something, a theme, and hopefully we're saying something to the world to say, we don't have all the answers, but we're going to ask questions, and we're going to talk about characters that we hope we act like. And through those moral fables, give people hope, inspire them. What that does is it's the engine. Stan also says a story without a theme is like a human without a soul. And who puts the soul there? People. So it's all of you, the creators, with your ideas. You come and you inject that soul into the body. And that's what connects to people when you tell your moral fables. It's your beliefs, it's what you want to tell, what you want to talk about, and the people feel that soul inside your story.